Anyway, but I honestly do not remember any kind of aha moment or moment when I didn't know that the church was true. I did have an experience. My mom's dad was a very active missionary and served a 5-year mission to Hawaii, and then came home, and after he was married and I guess the kids were moderately grown, spent another 2.5 years or something in Alabama, or southern states. And when we moved as a family to the South, there were still families who would, as my parents would go about meeting them, would say, "Oh, your father baptized me," or whatever. So there were families there that still had memories of my grandfather, who I never knew. He died before I was born. And so that, I think my testimony was always there and just has kept growing.
Yeah, the gospel was lived in my home a little differently. We were expected to go to church. My dad did not like emotion, and he would never go to testimony meeting because people would cry. And I know that my parents believed in the church. I didn't hear their testimonies. They did later become temple workers, and after high school, which was, I was never the superstar I wanted to be, so.
Is anyone in high school really ever the superstar they want to be?
Gary Lambert was. Gary Lambert he did the state record in the mile. Anyway, I signed up because I didn't want to get drafted. I signed up for the reserves, and I went to Fort Ord with 2 of my buddies to basic training. Oh my goodness, what a revelation. I became a number, ER 19686-979, sir. That's still emblazoned in my memory. That's my enlisted reserve number. And you just became a number. They would say, you go to KP, and you march through, and they give you a shot in each arm. And but the amazing thing was they let you go to church on Sunday. And I remember going to church, and we invited a friend who was a Japanese fellow, Ken Takahashi. And I sat there while he took the missionary lessons at church. The missionaries couldn't proselyte on the post. That's not allowed. But once you got into the church, you were fair game. And I remember too, they gave you a blistering handshake. Just burn your hand, it would be so hard. Anyway, my mouth was open. I never realized the gospel was so simple and so good and believable. And it all came to me, and I gained a desire to go on a mission while I was at Fort Ord for my basic training. And I do remember I got to be a marksman, and I threw a grenade better than anybody. But what made me mad was I couldn't beat the guy from UCLA in our distance running. He smoked, and I didn't. And I thought, I can beat him, but I couldn't. He was a good runner. Anyway, I did have an experience there where I realized how valuable the church was in my life. And so I went on a mission to England. That's where I was called. And it was an amazing call because my brother had run away, joined the Air Force, and ended up in England. And so I went to England. I was in the north and he lived in the south. I remember being with President Thorne, my mission president, and he said, "Why are you here?" And he kept saying that, "Why are you here?" He wanted me to bear my testimony, and I didn't have one. And I remember the very first person that we taught. Her name was Walker. And my companion's name was Garth Holyoke from Calgary, Alberta, Canada. It was really strange because here is Elder Alder and here's Elder Holyoke. It sounds like we worship trees. And we went to Sister Walker's house and my companion taught the plan of salvation, the fifth discussion. At that time, we memorized our discussions, and my mouth was open. He was such a great teacher. And I came home to what we called digs. We stayed with members, paid them, I think it was $90 a month, was our mission expense. And they would give us 2 meals a day in boarding room. And I knelt down that night and I prayed for Sister Walker with all my heart. And the spiritual experience that I had hoped I would get as youth came. Because the Spirit washed over me like I was standing under a waterfall. And I either heard a voice or had a very strong feeling that said, "You finally learned what I wanted you to, and that is that you would focus on others." I got to baptize Sister Walker too. And I still remember my companion was very kind to let me do the baptism. And I can remember when I lowered her into the water and brought her out, it felt like my blood was boiling. I looked up at heaven and I just said, "I want to do this again and again. Please help me." And I really had an incredible mission. I still remember one night I was teaching a man, and I don't remember what discussion it was, but there was a communication directly with him. I felt the Spirit communicate to me to say, "He knows it's true." And the night he was baptized, he came to me and he said, "I know precisely when you knew that I knew the church was true." And we had street meetings. I'll still never forget going out and standing on a corner. "People, please come and listen to my message." My whole life passed before me to do that because it wasn't in my nature.
Yeah, but that was common in that
Yeah,
time.
in England especially, because people did that. And you'd get hecklers and you would get people who really were interested in, the experiences still are very vivid, just like, I'm 81 years old and that happened when I was 19, 20, and 21. And they're still as vivid in my memory as they were then. I say to each of you who are thinking about a mission, go, because it is the most life-changing experience you will ever have. You think about other people all the time and you lose yourself And in doing so, the rewards are just unbelievably wonderful. You will experience joy like you've never felt. And a lot of it comes from just people saying, yes, I will be baptized, or yes, I know that Joseph Smith was a prophet. I got a special privilege at Christmas time of going down to see my brother. My companion and I traveled down to Swindon, where he was, and we spent Christmas with him. And I think at that time he was just becoming English. He was, he'd married an English girl, and he had one child. And I think he was feeling like they might live there. But he went out tracting with me, and he had some experiences just listening to my door approach and how people accepted us or rejected us. And
He was inactive, by the way.
he was inactive, yeah, thank you. And his wife was not a member. The experience told me that I needed to talk to him about coming back to the United States, and he made a decision to come back. So on my mission, it was kind of a tradition, at least in one district that I was in, that we initiate the new elders. And I was okay with it, kind of. And my companion, I had a new companion, and I just moved in there, and he said, we've actually got a appointment with a Church of England minister tonight. Can you handle that? And I said, I don't know. How is he? And he said, well, he seems to be interested. Okay. So we went over, and oh my goodness, this guy just wanted to bash and bash and bash. He just, everything I said, he took exception to and talked about scriptures that were, you know, obscure. And they let this go on for half an hour before he took his collar off and laughed because he's a member. That was my initiation. But the real initiation was, in England, they sell pig's heads. And they boil them for 3 or 4 days, and then they just let them sit on the counter, and they turn into what's called head cheese. And they eat that. Is that disgusting or what? Well, we would buy a pork head and put a bow around it and put it in a box and give it to a new elder as his present for coming into the mission. Grandpa was a tailor, and he began trips to Fish Lake early days with my mom. And my mom would describe what their camp was like. They would stay there in a tent for a month. He would go up in a Model A Ford up these windy roads to get there and pitch this tent. And she said, I can remember the water coming down from rain going under the tent. I could feel the water going under. And they had great strings of fish. They were good fishermen. And I had other memories of Fish Lake, and my grandma on one occasion there was waiting with my mom when we were on the far side of the lake. My dad had taken us over there with a very small motor and an old wood boat, and all of a sudden a storm came over the mountain. It's 9,000 feet at Fish Lake, and so a storm can come up fairly quick. And I remember us heading back, and Daryl, my brother, was with me, and Dad. And Dad said, Mike, would you move up to the front? Because the waves are getting so high that I'm afraid the boat will tip over backwards. and your weight will kind of counter that. And then we proceeded, and it took us, normally it was a 5-minute ride across the lake. It took us 45 minutes. And my grandma and my mom were waiting in the door of the cabin, worried to death that something had happened to us. And they didn't need to worry too bad because my brother Daryl lost his hat in the wind. And as soon as that blew off, he began to scream. And he yelled so loud, it was like having a siren. And that was one of my early spiritual experiences. I prayed for my dad as I looked in his face. And we got home. He wore glasses, so there was rain spots all over him. But he was glued to his effort to get us across the lake, and he wasn't going to let anything happen. My grandparents came to live with us, and my dad built a basement apartment for them to live in. And my grandpa was a really hard worker, and the yard that we had was filled with rock. I think it had been an old stream bed. And he would have me out there hauling rocks all the time. And he would say, "You are lazy, now get to work and keep going." And I was angry with him and didn't like him because he made me work so hard. But I think maybe he taught me how to work as a young man, and I appreciated that a lot. And I think because he was a fisherman and Fish Lake was important, that it's become a place for us. It's our family retreat. And my grandpa passed away with a massive stroke at 72. And I remember I was only 9 years old. It was my first experience with death. And then, I don't think they do this anymore. They went to the graveside, and after the grave was dedicated, they lowered the coffin in the ground while you were there. And they did the old throwing soil in. And I couldn't handle it. And I just remember, he's gone. And I didn't really understand what had happened until that moment. And it really changed me with my experience with death when that happened. I didn't have my own personal testimony or faith at that time, and so it was really hard. But Grandma then lived with us alone through the rest of her life, and she discovered that my grandpa had been baptized a member of the church, the LDS church, and when she found that out, she was really surprised, and she asked for the Book of Mormon. And she had this terrible shaking because of the Parkinson's disease. She read the whole Book of Mormon, shaking like this. She was baptized and lived long enough to be sealed to her husband. And it was my first experience with seeing somebody join the church. So it was pretty special. I know this, that Heavenly Father considers us coming into this world and leaving this world His domain. It's important to know that God is in charge. He is real. And many times as a bishop and as a stake president, I felt His presence when people are leaving this life. And I know that there is a time for us to come into the world and to leave.